Hello, we are now looking at slides 4.6, and we're looking here at interfaith dialogue as possible means for conflict resolution and for peace building. The material which I'm going to use for this set of slides today is taken by Mohammed Abu Nimer, and here you have the reference. The article is entitled "Religious Leaders in the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, from Violent Incitement to Nonviolent Resistance," and this is the book that I have already mentioned a few times where you can find it. Why is this set of slides here? It's because if we take a comparative perspective historically, if we take religious figures, I don't know, for example, Martin Luther King Jr., for example, or the same Mahatma Gandhi, or the Dalai Lama, Oscar Romero, Desmond Tutu, in their context, the works and actions and the writings of these leaders demonstrate that religious leaders, in fact, can play a part in demoting, if you want, violent conflict. And they can play a part and an important role in peace negotiations in various ways. For example, by providing input into the actual negotiation process, by monitoring agreements, by advocating for the rights of marginalized groups, raising awareness for the causes, about the causes and the destructive dynamics of conflict, through formal and informal peace education programs, and so on. So Abu Nimer divides or lists three categories or types of religious peace-building activities. And here I have them listed for you. The first one is advocacy and human rights activities, and these include campaigns, for example, to reveal the level of human rights abuses given by certain policies and structures, or to lobby locally and international to change these conditions. So as you can see from category number one, here we have a very fitting description of a civil society NGO, for example. Second kind of activities, dialogue and conflict resolution activities. These, in fact, again, are carried out mostly through civil society groups and NGOs to promote a deeper understanding of the other through dialogue encounters or training encounters. If you like, the promoting understanding and the raising awareness of the other echoes the kind of activities that we have encountered in week number one when we were talking about secular political organizations who were doing the same thing from a historical point of view, raising the awareness of one's own history and that of the other and of its pain, and trying to understand the image and the standing and the feelings and the perception of the other with a capital O. Finally, point number three, the third type of religious peace-building activity, it's entitled Liberation and Nonviolent Resisting Activities. These, as the title says, focus on nonviolent active confrontation of unjust policies or structures with an objective to remove or change them, the oppressive ones. Together with Mohammed Abu Nimer, we should point out that there is a geographical differences, which is a political difference, which also influence the kind of work that these groups do. Across the Green Line, or in Israel, in Israel and Palestine, across the Green Line, in fact, the majority of these groups which meet focus their work on advocacy and actions for human rights and peace, while inside Israel, inside the Green Line, so to speak, the majority of interreligious activities are focused on interfaith dialogue. So let's have a look now at the types of interfaith dialogue that exist and the contents of these interfaith dialogue. In general, interfaith dialogue in Israel/Palestine, therefore inside the borders of the Green Line, have adopted what Mohammed Abu Nimer calls a harmony process of dialogue, meaning identifying the common roots or the theological and ritualistic similarities and, of course, differences, avoiding or downplaying elements of political distinction, avoiding any political discussion, so as to overemphasize or emphasize common aspect, uniting aspects over divisive ones. This has at least two or three benefits, in the sense that it reduces the stereotypes and helps those who participate establish personal relations, human relations beyond the religious differences. And in fact, the content is the explorations of beliefs, rituals, cultural practice of the three monotheistic religions, and it's a sharing experience. So the participants can talk about their own individual practices or have group of expert panelists that lecture to them. And there are a few of these interreligious, interfaith dialogue activities or groups. And I have listed some here. The websites are listed on the website, on the linkography, if you like, section of the website. So, for example, the Women's Dialogue Group, the Interfaith Encounter Association, the Interreligious Coordinating Council in Israel, the ICCI, which is also connected to Rabbis for Human Rights that we've seen already, Yesodot and the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, workshops that have taken at Bar-Ilan University, and Liqa. So what kind of results do these interfaith dialogue achieve in the context of such an intractable conflict, and have they really contributed to peace building on any level? So this question is legitimate. So we have some good results and, of course, some obstacles and limitations. Let's look at some positive results, for example. Learning about the other, understanding other faiths, understanding symbols and rituals and the values of the different group, if they're anchored to a religious tradition or to a worldview that comes from a religious tradition or a religion. This is a very first important factor. This learning, the problem is that very often this learning remains confined to the small group that has participated to the one interfaith dialogue where they have participated without really being spread to the rest of society. Point number 2, a positive result is certainly rehumanizing the other after so much demonization, if you like. And this, according to Abu Nimer, is probably the most influential outcome of interfaith dialogue. This helps, in a way, overcoming the level of alienation and dehumanization of the enemy, which is the first step that one should adopt when participating to these dialogues. Actually, the step before that would be to reframe the exclusionary aspect of one's own faith and adopt a more inclusive and tolerant set of beliefs and worldview orientation, which is what some of these programs manage to do. Abu Nimer calls this the minimal first step for interreligious peace workers in the conflict. These dialogues, point number 1 and point number 2, together contribute to the recognition, the experiencing of the religion, the meaning of the other's religion, and it helps decode the cultural codes of the other. And therefore, the gaining a level of awareness is really of the other through religious understanding is really one of the preconditions for this kind of activities. And finally, point number three, spreading the message of interfaith peace. The idea here is that very often interfaith dialogue remains a closed experience for the few who participate in it. There is the need to spread and amplify the message of interfaith peace, and very often through press coverage and internet this can happen. So these are some important results that interfaith dialogue can achieve. But of course, there are some obstacles and some limitations to interfaith dialogue. First of all, the limited focus on the current political reality, and therefore a sort of a disconnection from the Arab-Jewish concerns of the mainstream, if you like. Moreover, these dialogues are really very much focused on this. They're very much perceived to be, but they also are symbolic in a way. And as important as it is to accept the symbol before accepting or turning it into a practice of life, they remain very often, they're perceived very often just as symbolic, and therefore are discarded as apolitical. Which is one of the real problems, because focusing so much on the religious and ritualistic and the understanding, theoretical part, understanding through the texts, also provokes a detachment from the real concerns of those who participate actually to this conflict, to both the conflicts and the dialogues, which are Palestinians and Israeli Jews. And as Abu Nimer says, there is also the risk that these kind of interfaith dialogues, as they are organized nowadays, they tend to reproduce the asymmetry of the conflict, whereby the dominant group, which is, of course, the Israeli/Jewish group of the participants, insist on the psychologization of the conflict in order not to discuss an alteration of the status quo, while the dominated group, which is the Palestinian group, insists and returns over again to talking about the violence and not the violence as a structural problem of the whole machinery that we call the occupation. So there are different positive, but also several obstacles and limitations. One thing which is certainly important to mention in this whole experience is the international involvement, which is always very present. And in particular, I would like you to go and browse the website that I've listed here, where you have a summary of the Alexandria Declaration of 2002. 2002, we are in the midst of the second Intifada, therefore a very difficult time for dialogue and for announcing violence and for preaching, if you like, or for adopting a non-violent perspective. But what we have here is a 3-day summit among senior Christian, Jewish and Muslim leaders, which resulted in the first ever joint declaration of religious leaders from the Holy Land that condemned violence and pledged to work for peace. And although this is, as you will see on this website, the list of participants is really of extremely senior and established and distinguished religious leaders, accompanied by some accompanied by some political leaders, not the foreign ministry, for example, of Israel, but the deputy foreign ministry of Israel, or of the Palestinian authorities. What distinguishes or what makes the difference between this experiment or this declaration and others is that there was a follow-up. There was a permanent committee for the implementation of the Alexandria Declaration that was established, and there was a follow-up in the sense that other spiritual leaders have joined in and to meet regularly. Now, I would like you just to read a couple of points from the Alexandria Declaration that you can find at this website that I've listed here. Point number 1, for example, says, "The Holy Land is holy to all three of our faiths. Therefore, followers of the divine religion must respect its sanctity, and bloodshed must not be allowed to pollute it. The sanctity and integrity of the holy places must be preserved, and the freedom of religious worship must be ensured for all." Number 2, Palestinians and Israelis must respect the divinely ordained purposes of the Creator by whose grace they live in the same land that is called holy. And so on. Number 4 is very interesting. As a first step now, remember that we are in the middle of the Second Intifada, we call for a religiously sanctioned ceasefire, respected and observed from all sides, and for the implementation of the Mitchell and Tenet recommendations, which had just been put forward, including the lifting of restrictions and return to negotiations. And so on. Point number 5 is also is interesting. We seek to help create an atmosphere where present and future generations will coexist with mutual respect and trust in the other. We call on all to refrain from incitement and demonization and to educate our future generations accordingly. As you can see, this is not by now. I mean, we are at section number 4, at unit number 4. We know that the education and to trust and respect in the other and to refraining from demonization and dehumanization of the other is part and parcel of the work of all these organizations, whether they're religious or secular. This declaration, the Alexandria Declaration, was a little bit of a breakthrough in the Middle Eastern in the role that the religious leadership kept for itself in the conflict, and most of all, it had a very important international echo, and it was reported in the press. It was commented upon, and as I said, there was a follow-up anyway. Now, as a concluding set of slides, two last slides to go. We've spoken about Christians, we've spoken about Jews. I remind you that there were also Muslims, of course, signing the Alexandria Declaration, and in particular, there was the Chief Justice of the Sharia Court, Sheikh Taysir Tamimi. There was the Ministry of State for the Palestinian Authority, Sheikh Tel Al-Sidr at the time, the Mufti of the Palestinian Armed Forces, Sheikh Abdul Salam Abu Shkhedem, the Mufti of Bethlehem, Sheikh Tawil, and so on. Together with rabbis and representatives of the Bishop of Jerusalem, the Melkite Archbishop, and so on. But given that religion is often represented as promoting incitement towards hatred, and especially the mainstream discourse on religion and on Islam is that of a religion which is certainly not peaceful, I think we should point to a few examples of nonviolent resistance and of Muslim faith-based organizations that support nonviolent direct action. We will see, we have seen already in unit number 2 nonviolent actions during this first Intifada and the tax strike in Bet Sahur, which is also a means of nonviolent resistance. So, as Mohammed Abu Nimer says, it's important to note, first of all, that religious leaders and individual mosques participate and organize protests and strikes and petitions in a non-violent way. And many of these religious leaders, we've seen some in Budrus, in the film Budrus, that I hope you have seen. Many of these religious leaders are part of non-violent committees that fight against the separation, the barrier, the separation wall, or again to protect the harvesting season, the olive harvesting season. I should mention a few examples. The already mentioned Sheikh Tamimi, that was an active participant in many non-violent actions around the West Bank and Jerusalem, or Sheikh Salah, who was among the first to protest when the Israeli government decided to build a sort of a catwalk to reach the Mughrabi, the walkway, that leads from below the Wailing Wall to the Al-Aqsa compound. And it's all again Sheikh Salah that organized a campaign to restore and reclaim those Muslim holy places like mosques and cemeteries inside the 1948 borders of Israel that have been destroyed, neglected, transformed into shopping malls, as in the case of Mamilla, and so on. And these are all parts of a non-violent campaign organized by Muslim faith-based organization. I should also mention the last one, which is the campaign to protect the Al-Aqsa mosque, and this is by Sheikh Raed Salah from al-Fahm in the north, and he organizes various trips and prayers of Muslims from the north to come and pray as a form of solidarity with other Muslims who are in Jerusalem and against the Israeli policy of expanding into Jerusalem and the old city and in its eastern part, and to violate the Islamic heritage in Jerusalem. So these are a number of examples and an evaluation of interfaith dialogue, which is our second last presentation for this week. We will now move on to the last one, which is actually connected to the theology of liberation in Palestine, and with the activities of one group of Palestinian Christians. So thank you. I'll see you there. Bye-bye.